Today, Black Shalom L'Chaim, purified drinking water. They got it is up there. Shouts out to the 12 tribes, support the people, not the cause, man. Now, first of all, I want to apologize for my visual absence, and I want to call this more of my from the stadium play. Okay, as you see, I'm not present, but we still getting into information. So these next few videos are gonna be like this from a stadium stands perspective, meaning I will be taking a visual absence for the next 10 videos, maybe 12 videos, could be more, but I'll see you guys soon, and as always, support the people, not the cause, man. And anyway, yeah, you're gonna hear the same audio for each one of those videos too. So if you click the last video, you heard this, and if you click the next video, you're gonna hear the same thing. But this is how we do it from the stadium stands. But yeah, just to keep it up to date, we're gonna be talking about Enoch and all kind of stuff, from Enoch to Jacob to the TNK. Another thing on top of another thing. What I mean by stadium stands is, I have my left fields and I have my right fields. I said there's gonna be no center fields or shortstops yet, but this was more like stadium stands because for one, I'm taking a visual absence. I'm like out there in the crowd on this one, and for two, it's kind of like me sitting back. I'm not pushing this, trying to convert, or like I said, or do anything other than provide information. So that's what I mean by stadium stands. I'm gonna take a back seat on this one and watch the game. Okay. If that makes any sense to you. Wish y'all could see me do this when I do this. Cue that music I like.
Keeps blurring my vision. Inherited sickness. Oh, well, American privilege. Well, it keeps blurring my vision. Inherited.
After his very physical confrontation with God, Jacob had been humbled once again. Not only was he now made to feel his God's existence, but he was also made to remember it forever in the form of a painful limp, after God had dislocated his hip. But believe it or not, this was only one of Jacob's impending problems, for that very morning, when God had overpowered him, Esau was fast approaching. We saw in the last chapter that Jacob was rightly terrified of Esau. He was certain that Esau had no doubt held the grudge that had brewed between them so many years ago, and that now, after all these years, Esau was definitely coming for revenge. So as we saw, Jacob had devised an earnest plan to appease his older brother by sending him servants, his animals, and his possessions in an effort to not only buy his way back into his brother's good books, but also to prove to him that he was repentant over what had transpired. The Bible tells us Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children in the front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Evidently, Jacob continues to fear the worst in the face of this encounter. It's plausible that he was still tilted after his confrontation with God, a struggle that had lasted all night long, and had likely left him weary. Yet it does not stop him from carrying out the last-minute preparations, or precautions, before facing his brother. You'll notice that as he divides his family into this particular formation, that he places himself in front. Leah and her children go behind him and his servants, and Rachel and Joseph go at the back. As you might imagine, this formation is deliberate and shows us not only more about Jacob's character, but exactly who Jacob values the most. By placing himself first, he can be seen as heroic, in that he is willing to put himself in harm's way for the sake of his family. He bears the brunt of whatever intentions his brother has, and does not subject any of his family, not even the servants, to bear this burden. Jacob recognizes that this is the most noble thing he can do for his family, and might even act as a shield for them as they make their way towards Esau. This is starkly different from Abraham, who though was much closer to God and by far more celebrated by him, chooses still to hide behind his wife Sarah when in conflict with Pharaoh or Abimelech. Jacob, to his credit, does not hide behind his family, and had a swarm of arrows been fired upon their approach, it would be Jacob who would be struck first by the volley. By going first, Jacob proves to have evolved as a character, for he does not try to scheme or manipulate his way out of his circumstance, but merely accepts his fate as gracefully as possible. With this protective formation, one might say that he's willing to die for his family, and though his body would offer little protection for them, it is the sentiment behind the gesture that speaks volumes. Of course, there is also another detail of this protective formation that might impress you less. You'll have noticed that before assuming his place at the head of the line, he places the female servants and their children in the front. This would make some sense, as he would likely be hoping to protect his actual family, and whilst he would have needed the servants, he valued his family more. But behind them, he places Leah and her children before proceeding to create yet another layer to this organization by placing Rachel and Joseph at the back. With this, we see him openly favor Rachel and Joseph, and it becomes apparent both which of his wives he values more and which of his children he is partial to. The Bible doesn't make any further comment as to what kind of strife this would have caused between these three layers, especially between Rachel and Leah, who would now surely know who the favourite wife was and who the favourite child was. Of course, you might argue that they were far too preoccupied with the prospect of dying at the hands of Esau, but indeed, it does nonetheless show us Jacob's priorities, and that no matter the circumstances, Jacob would not only always pick Rachel over Leah, but he would also choose Joseph over his other children too. After preparing his family in order of their importance to him, Jacob led them to meet Esau. As stated, we see him bow to the ground 7 times as he makes his way towards Esau, who after having already received Jacob's gifts, would have been hard-pressed not to believe that his brother's attempts at reconciliation were genuine. By bowing down, Jacob undeniably submits to Esau, perhaps seeking to clarify that what he'd heard from his servants was true, and to perhaps exemplify that he wanted nothing more. It may also have been seen as Jacob's desperation to protect the formation behind him, for now that he had no more gifts or property left to give Esau, chose to throw himself down before him in the hopes of mercy. Now Esau, who would be watching this whole thing unfold, would have been no doubt perplexed. Perhaps there was a part of him that was suspicious of Jacob, for his brother had fooled him twice before. Why would the third occasion be any different? Furthermore, it had been years since Esau had even seen his brother, so it's plausible that he may have rendered him irrelevant and cast him to the back of his mind. Seeing him now may have evoked little emotion at all, given the amount of time that had passed between the two, and like Isaac and Ishmael, it's possible that the two may have lived great independent lives without much regard for the other. But if you were expecting Esau to draw his bow at the sight of his limping brother, or unsheath his sword at the sibling who had stolen everything from him, then you may be disappointed. Indeed, while some might have expected Esau to have tackled Jacob there and then, and delivered upon him the vengeance that he had been saving for so many years now, Esau instead embraces his brother. The Bible tells us, "But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept." In what is possibly one of the earliest heartfelt moments in the Bible, we see a sibling rivalry come to an end, as bygones become bygones and hatchets become buried. For all the rage and anger that Esau had felt in his younger years, all appears to be replaced with a relief to once again see his brother and to forgive him for what he has done. You'll notice that the two don't actually appear to say anything to each other about what had occurred between them, but instead embrace and weep. Their wordless reunion is a powerful moment in the story, where neither brother needs to express what they feel, because everything has already been said with their actions. Jacob's remorse is undeniable in his dropping to his knees at the sight of his brother, whilst Esau's forgiveness of Jacob is genuinely authentic, given that he rushes out to embrace Jacob before he's even arrived. With this embrace, the past is automatically resolved, and it might be said by believers that in their willingness to be open, God entered their hearts, allowing them to resurrect and heal their troubled relationship. The Bible then tells us that Esau looks up first and asks Jacob who the people are who have come with him. And Jacob explains that these were his wives and children. With this introduction, the female servants step forth with their children and bow down, followed by Leah and her children, and lastly by Rachel and Joseph. Esau then asks what was the meaning behind the flocks and the herds that had been sent to him, and Jacob replies that he had gifted his own property to him in an effort to find favour in his eyes. With this, we understand that Esau did not presume to have superiority over Jacob, despite being his elder, and that now in his maturer age, he has abandoned his previous notions that Jacob ought to have been beneath him, as the second-born. He proceeds to appear flattered by Jacob's offering, but tells him to keep his property, for he has enough of his own. But Jacob is insistent and begs his brother to accept his offering, saying, "No, please, if I have found favour in your eyes, accept this gift from me, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favourably. Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." Jacob's adamancy is admirable here. He could have accepted Esau's leniency and kept his flocks and herds. With that, he would have not only achieved the forgiveness of his brother, but he would have also maintained his many lucrative animals. But it would appear that Jacob was above such things by this point in his life, and it would appear that the only way he could ensure his brother had truly forgiven him was by this transaction being completed. You might also say that Jacob felt as if he needed to lose something, such as his herds and flocks, in order to truly feel absolved of any ill virtue, and that he would only have felt a relief from his guilt if Esau accepted his offerings. You may also notice that Jacob declares that he has all that he needs. He had his family, he had his life, and in that moment he had the forgiveness of his brother. If he was to lose his herds, cattle, and his riches, then it wouldn't have mattered, for the most important aspects in his life were now very much present. The Bible tells us that because Jacob insisted so strongly, Esau accepted the gifts. It may be said that Esau's acceptance of the gifts was also imperative to the brothers' reconciliation. The large number of animals gifted to Esau was symbolic of Jacob's regret and repentance. It showed just how sorry Jacob was, and how far he was willing to go in order to set the record straight. By agreeing to take the gifts, you might say that Esau was acknowledging the sorrow his brother felt, and not only validated Jacob's apology, but also accepted it. Then Esau told Jacob to come back home with him, and that he would accompany him on his journey. But Jacob appears to make up a bit of an excuse, likely on the account that he was either untrusting of Esau's acceptance of his apology, or suspicious at how easily Esau had welcomed him back. He tells Esau that he needed to tend to his remaining cattle, and that because they were nursing their young, they could not be driven hard, otherwise they would die. He proposed that Esau should go on ahead, and that he would follow at the pace of his children, until he arrived at Seir. Indeed, Jacob was relieved to be reunited with his brother, but this does not mean he was not still scared of him, which is why here he appears to establish some distance. Esau may have sensed his brother pulling away, or at least his brother's trepidation, for he offers to leave some of his men behind with Jacob. But Jacob refuses this offer and once more begs Esau to do as he says, so that he might find favour in the eyes of his God. So with hesitancy, Esau made his way back to Seir with his men, but Jacob did not end up following. Instead, the Bible tells us that Jacob went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. We see Jacob yet again revert back to his old ways, deceiving Esau by promising to follow, but ultimately going back on his word and doing what was best for himself. It's likely, as aforementioned, that he still feared Esau, and though he knew he was forgiven, did not wish to live with the shame of having conceded to him. Another idea is that Jacob, despite his emotional reconciliation with Esau, had doubts over their compatibility, and instead of returning with Esau to Seir, where they would inevitably fall out again, chose instead to leave when their relationship was on a high. With this idea, Jacob demonstrates greater emotional intelligence, and maybe even some compassion, given that he is aware that as much as he and his brother may have missed each other, they cannot coincide. By resisting the genuine favour of Esau and choosing to go alone to Succoth, Jacob spares both of them the heartache of falling out again. Another idea is that despite how genuine Esau may have seemed, this may have been a front, and it took a schemer like Jacob to underpin such a deception that Esau may have been planning. This may have also been why Jacob was so adamant not to follow his brother back to Seir, and even more adamant not to take any of Esau's men, who would have forbidden him from going elsewhere. As soon as he is able, Jacob takes his chances alone with his family in Succoth, far away enough from a brother who may or may not have had bad intentions after all. The Bible concludes that Jacob would arrive safely at the city of Shechem, in Canaan, and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver, he brought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground, where he pitched his tent and built an altar to his God.